Well, let's get started. For those that you haven't met me, I'm Chaplain Stu Boyd. Just a little bit of background about me. I was 30 years active duty Air Force and flew lots of neat airplanes and fast airplanes. And then in about 2002, became ordained and was invited by then the wing commander wing chaplain Bill Cochran, who I was working with, to join Civil Air Patrol, and I've been part of it ever since. Was the chaplain for Thunderbird for a while, and then chaplain for Weber Minuteman. Did a little stint as wing chaplain, and then just about 3 years ago, got involved with Chaplain Hughes, who was then the national chaplain. And we had several long talks about then the CDI, or actually moral leadership at the time. And with then following national chaplain with Charlie Satgast, who I knew well from my church denomination, we decided to go at it. So for those of you who are CDIs or chaplains and don't like the new system, please let me know. We're in a rewrite right now. But more recently, I'm a certified VOAD disaster chaplain and a crisis chaplain in the state of Utah. And I became involved with a group called Utah Strong Recovery Project. And this is managed by the Utah Department of Human Services, and we're on a grant from FEMA. It's the same type of program that would be involved with a hurricane or a natural disaster. Part of that program is educational. And so I've been doing quite a bit of creative work, creating educational materials presented both to university systems, Weber State, University of Utah, SUU, as well as in the schools. So what I'd like to do is share with you one of those educational presentations this afternoon. Let's see, I would just, Mike, do you know how, can you tell me how to get the chat box up, or is that up now? I guess he's not on. Well, if you have any questions, put them into chat or raise your hand on the reactions tab, and I'll pick you up from there. So with that, I'm gonna get my screen a little smaller if I can. And here we go. Okay, I'm going to start with a video, and if it doesn't come through, let me know. And I think I've got everything set up right, but we'll try. Should have sound. I don't hear anything. Okay, I've got to see if I can. Mike, are you there?
Let me call.
Okay, there's some way. All right, I have not used Microsoft Teams. I've used Google and Zoom, but not this one. There is a way to get the sound on here. I want to come out of full screen. And first of all, okay, anybody out there in the land know how to turn on the sound from the, I'm showing Let's see if I can go to computer. Doesn't give me the option to go to computer audio anywhere that I can see. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll just wing this without the videos. There are not too many of them on here. But let's go to this next slide. Okay, the way our lives are set up is that we operate with stress all the time. Most of it is what we would call good stress, in the fact that our glasses are half full. That's the stress to get done in the morning, to decide, that we want to make breakfast and do the normal things, go to work, clean the house, whatever. And so those are the things that keep us moving. Some people call that eustress. Get dangerous if it flows out over the top. Now, it can really flow out in two ways. One, splash out, and we can respond with what is termed the flight or fight response. Our systemic nervous system takes over, begins shutting down the blood vessels in the outer part of our extremities, focuses blood in the brain area, heart beats faster, chemicals are created or hormones are created in the cortisol or the cortisol glands, or cortisol is injected into our system, which increases the amount of glucose, and we get adrenaline and neuroadrenaline, the flight or fight response. In one of my lessons, I've embedded that video of the hiker in Creek, or the jogger in Mill Creek Canyon that encounters the baby cougar and wants to get a picture of the baby cougar on his cell phone. So as he walks toward the baby cougar, which you can see in the very first part of the video, Mama shows up, and for 6 minutes, Mama pursues him. Clearly, he is in a flight or fight, but also he's doing the right thing, which is he keeps looking at the cougar, backing away slowly, and eventually Mama tires and goes back to her baby. If you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. Uses a lot of colorful language, which has been bleeped out. But if you just go to YouTube, Utah cougar and the runner, you should be able to see it. So there are lots of things that this COVID area has stressed out. There was an article on the 14th of March on the in the Salt Lake Tribune that said that there is a potential for a second pandemic, and that second pandemic is not one of disease, but it's one of mental issues. That if you look at the research regarding what happens in a hurricane or a flood or a fire, there's an initial peaking of stress, and then as the actual event passes, stress begins to return back to normal, and then it comes up again a second time as people begin to put their lives back together. And so the prediction from the National American Psychological Association is that we were probably going to be looking at a second peak of stress. In fact, they did a January study which showed the stress levels now are higher than they have been ever during the epidemic itself. So we need to learn how to manage it, how to help other people manage it, And so where we're going to go from here is to talk about, first of all, how kind of we are wired. For those of you who are aviators, this is a pretty common thing in most every airplane. It's called a warning and caution panel. And when those lights come on, they tell us that there is something going on in the airplane that we need to pay attention to. If it's a red light, we need to really pay attention to it. And if it's a caution or an amber light, it's something we need to take some specific action before it gets worse. So we are wired with a warning and caution panel, and it looks something like this. Each of these indicators are different things that different people experience when they're stressed. Insomnia seems to be a pretty common one, especially around the school kids. I did a class Friday at Jefferson Academy, which is in Kaysville, and almost every child in that class, and these are third graders, when asked whether they were having trouble going to sleep, raised their hand. Of course, another common response in the children area is irritability and being around cooped up with brothers and sisters and so on. But you can look around that list and kind of pick out your own caution and warning lights. And if you see them coming on fairly constantly, or you see many of them coming on at once, it probably means you're being stressed at a level beyond where that glass started to spill, and you need to do something about it. And that's what this presentation is all about. Notice that those indicators are grouped in 4 different areas, and you could read those: mind, body, behavior, and emotions. And that's because we are wired as a system now, but we're not a one-way system. We're a two-way system. They feed back into each other. So that if we can address one area from the perspective of lowering the stress level associated with that, then we can impact the whole system. Some of you may be familiar with this therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy. It's exactly that same kind of thing, where they try to influence really how we look at things, which in turn improves our emotions and our mind. In this system, I'd like to look at an example. Some of you, I'm sure, are runners. I was for years before my knees said don't do that anymore. But I would really almost daily go out especially when I was on active duty, and run each day. When I ran, the things that were worrying me, or at least stressing me on the job, financial issues or whatever, that tended to be reduced. And when I was able to reduce that, my mood was improving when I was outside. And frankly, when I got back to the office, I was a nicer person. So we'll talk about 6 ways that you can practically reduce your stress. And I'm just going to unfold them here because we're going to return and talk about each of these individually and provide you some tools that you can apply in your life. So I want to pause here for a minute, I think. No, I don't. Well, what I'd like you to do before I start through this particular video is I'd like you to make sure you have access to either copy paper that's blank on both sides, or a couple of pieces of paper that one side is blank, and something to write with, because we'll have a couple of exercises coming up here that will need those particular tools. So, Mike, did you happen to be on? No. Okay, I'd like to get the sound up, but okay. Hopefully you're all back and ready with your paper and a pen or a pencil. The importance of pen and pencil in this whole stress model is pretty critical. And the reason for that is because the way our brain is constructed. The front part of it, we call that the prefrontal cortex, is where we do our thinking and our reasoning. Some people call it the executive function of the brain. And when we're up in that part of the brain, we're focused on the task at hand. We're focused on developing solutions. We're focused on effective communication. And it's difficult for the stress part of our brain, which is the amygdala and the hippocampus, to dominate us. Now, the hippocampus and the amygdala are tied into a thing called the sympathetic nervous system. And they are the ones that triggered those adrenal glands that I talked about. They're the ones that create those hormones, heartbeat faster, breathe deeper. So they're the ones that trigger the stress. The way our brains function is you can't really function in both of those areas at the same time. So by writing things down, what you can do is you can force your thinking into that prefrontal cortex, and that in turn will reduce the stress levels in this hippocampus and amygdala area. So the stress will be, at a minimum, will be reduced. In some cases, can almost disappear while you're trying to do that. So each of these 6 tools will have a written component to it, which will help reduce the stress. So let's go to the first one, which is prioritize. We have some needs that we don't want to worry about prioritizing. Housing, food, emotions. Clearly someone with thoughts of harming themselves or someone else. These need to be taken care of and ask for help now. As I said, I'm a member of the Utah Strong Recovery Project. We have a crisis line, which is available, and I will provide that number later in the presentation. But also you could talk to a pastor, a religious leader, friend. Any of these could help you out. Now, the rest of it is writing down a list of needs and prioritize. What that video would have shown you is a process by which at the start of every day or at the end of the day, either way, you look at what lays ahead. My wife is a big list maker, and she makes lists of lists sometimes. But you list everything that you can think of that needs to be done, and let's assume you're doing it for tomorrow. And then you prioritize them, with A being the top priority, for example, and maybe an E or an F being a very low priority. And then you start through your list and you do your A's, and then you do your B's, and so on. And then if you're in the habit of making your list at the end of the day, you look at anything that's left over from today and put it on tomorrow's list, and then go back through that prioritization process. And clearly you start at the A's or the top of your list and work down. So that's the first of the tools that we discuss with our classes. By the way, the source of these tools is a document called Skills for Psychological Recovery. And I think, I'm assuming you can see this. This is a manual that was developed by an organization called SAMHSA, which is Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services in the U.S. Department of Health. It has in there these 6 skills along with additional worksheets, and it also breaks these skills down into a section for children, a section for adolescents, and a section for adults. So if you have children that are stressed with online school, by the way, that is the number one stressor that we encounter when we're dealing with students in schools, is online schools. It provides you worksheets. It provides you exercises, different things, and they are developed in an age-appropriate way so that you can use them with your family. And again, that's Skills for Psychological Recovery, SPR. Okay, the second thing on our list is problem solving. One of the things that I was able to do after I retired was serve as adjunct faculty for Weber State. And they were teaching a course in for what they call the supply chain managers. These are the people that move the parts, make them available for at either the base level or the depot level. They do the ordering and tracking and this type of thing. And so there was a proposal, which turned out to be very successful, that they would divide them into groups and send them off to spend about 6 weeks studying in depth the issue of how to solve problems. And then at the end of the exercise, and by the way, most of that was just teaching them tools, pivot tables and Excel, other things they could do. There was a week-long exercise which involved, and then one that I remember is the landing light on the KC-135, which is the refueler that all of the Air Force uses. And that landing light was essential if you're going to do any night flying or even any weather flying. And the issue was the landing lights were burning out faster than they were predicted to fail. And therefore, there were KC-135s grounded for lack of a landing light. And so the problem we presented with literally thousands of pieces of data to these small groups, that were divided into groups of about teams of about 8, was to solve the landing light problem. The first class that we sent through, and I think we had roughly maybe 60 per class, nobody came close. And so when we went back and analyzed the process that they used, it turned out that nobody spent enough time on defining the problem. They immediately started throwing solutions around, found one that seemed to sound pretty good, and went off with it. As it turned out, the problem was not the landing light, it was the wiring into the landing lights, which in high humidity and high moisture environments was failing and shorting out and then sending surge currents into the landing light itself. So we went back and said, we need to teach this class problem solving skills before they get into trying to find solutions. Well, problems are stressful for all of us. And so I'd like to present to you a problem solving model, which is a fairly effective way to address a problem to make sure that you really have it in hand. And it's named after that thing down in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. That's a ribeye steak. And here's what ribeye stands for. Because if we're all stressed up, it's impossible for us to handle problems. Then we need to identify the problem itself and write it down. And that's helpful in the third step, brainstorming, because if we have it written down, everybody in the brainstorm group can have that in front of them, so they're all working on the same issue. And of course, I'm sure all of you have brainstormed and understand kind of the ground rules and so on for it. You look at all the solutions you've evaluated. When we do complex problems, when I was on the staff at Weber State, we worked with Dr. Ann Milner, who eventually was the president. And she would hand us all sticky dots, and we'd get our solutions out on a whiteboard with stickies, and then we'd all go vote with our little sticky dots to evaluate the ideas. We say yes to the best one, and then finally make sure that we implemented or encouraged ourselves to implement the solution we came up with. And sometimes that encouragement is an important step. We may come up with a solution which, frankly, we don't want to implement. It may be a relational problem where we have to apologize or ask for forgiveness for somebody. And although we know that's the answer or the solution to the problem, we don't do it. So let's, excuse me, let's quickly apply the model to a problem. When we do this with Zoom, we use breakout rooms and other tools that are there. I've looked, and yes, you can link them into to Microsoft Teams, but it was kind of beyond my technical level to make it happen. So here's the issue. Son struggling with online school, not able to supervise. You had to get a part-time job to help with the finances. You got a call from your son's teacher who said that he was behind 12 assignments. And some mornings when you are working, he doesn't even join the class. This, by the way, is based on a real world problem I encountered with one of the senior high school, excuse me, one of the senior high school groups that I was working with. It was shared with me with the teacher. So let's look at the R, which stands for, you can remember it, it's relaxing, so we're all relaxed. We write down the problem, and I decided that it's an issue of supervising the son that is the problem itself. We brainstorm, we come up with all kinds of ideas. The wife could quit her job, husband could get a second job to add the finances, ask a neighbor to come in, all kinds of things. So we get those all laid out, we evaluate and decide what the best one was, and say yes to one of the solutions you developed. Maybe when we were looking at the brainstorm, there was a relative nearby who at one time was a teacher. And so we said, that's really a good idea. We'll invite her in and maybe even hire her as a tutor, and the wife can work in a couple of extra hours to pay her. And then we, of course, follow through and implement it. So the next time you have a problem to solve, try this ribeye model. Relax, identify the problem, brainstorm, evaluate it, say yes to one of your solutions, and then go and follow through. So here comes number 3, managing reactions. I mentioned the mountain lion story, and we just used that one as kind of the first way we can manage our reactions. And these often fall in the category of good stress. We see a threat, our brain has got additional blood coming into it to analyze the threat. We decide on a course of action, and that gentleman we talked about earlier had understood enough that you don't run away from a mountain lion, they can outrun you. So he quietly backed away while, as I said, using colorful language. Video is pretty impressive. The lion actually leaps a couple of times, and it almost scares you watching the video. But there's a second kind of problem, and it's the one that causes us probably the worst kind of stress. And then that's where we have an event coming up in the future. We're worried about it, and we can't get it off our mind. This is the type of thing that keeps us awake at night. It's the type of thing which saps our energy, potentially makes us very touchy, easy to anger, and so on. So we need ways to manage what we had on the event, or between now and the event, we need things to do. So let's look at some things. But let's start with a problem. And again, this is one that's not too uncommon. New position has been identified where you work. This new position will involve more responsibility, but with a significant increase in pay. 3 final candidates. You are one. Final interviews are scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. You're concerned about the interview. You really want the job. So you've got an evening and a morning to decide what exactly, how you're going to manage the stress during that time. And I'll give you just a minute, just in your own mind, run over a couple of things that you might do to manage that stress, and then we'll list some things out. All right, here are just a few ideas. Talk to a friend, your spouse, someone about the problem itself, just to kind of get it off your chest and to process it. You can journal. This is an excellent, excellent way to deal with your feelings and emotions associated with a stressful issue. You don't necessarily, you do not have to write a novel, just a single piece of paper where you say, here's what you're facing, or identify what you're facing, and then put words to the emotions and fears and so on that are going on inside. You can exercise. As I said, jogging was very helpful for me at keeping my stress levels down, but even a walk is something that'll get your mind off it. You watch a funny video on YouTube that some people, when they've done the research, simply know how to find funny videos on YouTube, and they'll binge on those for a while or binge on Netflix. And then here's one that I think some of you have probably heard about. It's a very, very powerful tool. I had heard about some of the components of mindfulness, but I had never spent any amount of time studying it. We actually are teaching a course, or have taught a course at Weber State on mindfulness. We'll teach one next June. And it's a course we're offering also, as I mentioned, at USU or U of U and SUU currently. Mindfulness is, you can read that, I'm not going to read it for you, but basically it's getting you out of the peripheral things that are going on in your head and focusing on you, making your mind stay home is another way to think about it. And in doing so, not only does it get you up in the frontal part of your brain, but it also will help you deal with the stress. That last sentence in short, you tune into what's real now. And it is clinically proven to reduce stress. At this Jefferson Academy, we used some of the same information, but obviously tailored to be age appropriate. So when we asked about this, what do people do? We were astounded to find that about half the class, these are third graders, they are not reluctant to participate. And so they're waving hands all over the room, and about the first three answers were all the same. Breathing. And so we kind of stopped. We were astounded. Occasionally, and we've probably taught this class, at least 50 times, that number of people all had the breathing thing. And so we stopped and asked and said, where did you learn about that? And they said, they teach it here at the Jefferson Academy. It turns out they're not the only one that teaches. There's mindfulness teaching in the Davis district that's going on now. Several of the charter schools that I've worked with teach it. And so if you're not too up on it, I suggest that you practice it. So let's practice an exercise. I had this one on video with soft music and all the rest of it, but I can narrate this thing pretty well. So I'm going to play the video. Just imagine you're listening to soft music, and then let's practice it. It's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here we go. Okay, I want you to look around wherever you are and identify 5 things. Kind of let your breathing slow down, and then look around the room or out the window, or see if you can, identify 5 different objects while, maybe breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth, being relaxed. Okay, now you can look down and listen, and I'd like you to hear 4 different things. If you're at home, dishwasher running, slow breathing. And now go to 3 sensations. Your feet on the floor, maybe your arms on the table. Now we want to transition to the sense of smell and do 2 different smells. Maybe you lift your hand and smell your hand, maybe a clean shirt smell. And finally, a taste. What does your mouth taste like? Have you licked the end of your pen? And then you let your breathing go. So this is one of the guided videos that are available to help you practice mindfulness. There is a thing called Davis Mindfulness Center, which has a number of videos. And again, there are videos for your kids, for you, and another strong component of mindfulness is breathing, structured breathing. One thing we teach is square breathing, where you breathe in to the count of 4, hold to the count of 4, kind of across the top, exhale to the count of 4 down the side, and then hold for 4 at the bottom. That's one of my favorites, is the square breathing. It's good for me if I'm having trouble getting to sleep. I'll spend a couple of minutes on square breathing, and almost every time I'm off in dreamland after I do that. I know Chaplain Barlow, who I think is on, used this a lot with the cadets at the encampment a couple of years ago, because when these kids, typically 12 to 14, first time away from home for some, when they get there, there's a lot of stress as they're being yelled at in basic training and the rest, and it helps them to come down off what they're doing. Oops, I need to get off of that. Excuse me. Okay, positive activities and attitudes. This is the number 4, and it's no rocket science to know that when you're having fun, you're less overwhelmed by the stress in your life, and that's because we're producing a hormone called dopamine, which makes us feel good. Some people have found that they can put it in a pill, and it makes them feel good. And we are also controlling that cortisol, which was both the good hormone when it hit the flight or fight, but it is a very bad hormone over time, causing all kinds of issues. So, well, here's my pause slide. That was but you have your paper and your pencil. So what I want you to do is, you don't have to make a copy of this, but I'd like you to make room for listing things you like to do. It doesn't have to be 5, just things you like to do. And then there will be a second category. What do you need? So, for example, and what we're talking about there is the things you need to execute one of those things you like to do. Put a category at the bottom: when is it going to happen? And then finally, opposite to what do you need, is when we'll do it. So let me walk you through this exercise, and I'll give you a few minutes to fill your sheets out as we go along. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to list some things on our worksheet we like to do. Here's a list of things I'll just let you look at for a minute while you begin to make a list of things that you like to do. And I'll give you about 2 minutes to do that. And while you're thinking about those things you like to do, it's moving up to the front part of your brain, reducing your stress. You're writing them down, which is reducing your stress. all good things. Just to give you an idea what a sheet might look like, I just kind of put a few things in. About 30 seconds more. Okay, the next step in the exercise is we want to pick one of those activities that you've listed. And my suggestion is pick something that you can do in the next week or so, by next Saturday. You might have listed, I'd like to take a trip to Paris, but you're probably not going to do that. So put a circle around it. Give you a few seconds to pick one. And now we're going to use those lines underneath. So we want to look at our activity and list what we need to do to make it happen. So I picked my mountain biking activity, and here were the things I said I needed to do. Do the same thing with your activity. We'll give you about, say, 1 minute to list the things you need to do to make your activity happen. Now, if I list or circled read a book, I need to get a book, where I would define where I get a book, decide when I was going to read, where I was going to read, that type of thing. You want to get as many steps as you can down on how to make that happen. In some ways, we're making a to-do list for that activity. And so in making our to-do list, we need to put a schedule beside it so that we have a better idea of how we're going to get it to happen. So again, I just listed a hypothetical schedule out there on how I was going to put my bike ride together. I'll give you another minute now to decide when you're going to do those things. And last but not least, you have to decide when you're going to do it. So I decided Saturday, maybe next Saturday, I guess, is when I'm going to do that. So that's kind of an idea of what a completed positive activity planning worksheet should look like. Again, as I mentioned, there are some age-appropriate ones that are back in that Skills for Psychological First Aid. Okay, we're going to go to number 5, which is helpful thinking. I think some of us remember an individual called Norman Vincent Peale, who is a big proponent of positive thinking. And I think we'd all agree that if we get our mind full of unhelpful thoughts, then it's going to impact our thoughts and our feelings. Remember, I talked about that cognitive-based therapy idea, and that focuses on controlling how our mind processes things. So if I'm thinking this mask is a waste of time, then I'm going to be irritated when I'm wearing it. I'm really going to be irritated when I forget it and leave it in the car and have to go back and get it. It's just I'm going to have unhappy thoughts about wearing that mask around. And some people can get downright almost violent. Um, and I think all of you recognize that gent, a guy named Igor, probably one of the most unhelpful thinking individuals in history. He was always down. There was always something wrong. Couldn't find his tail, had trouble building his house. The world was full of ugly things. Now, if we can take that unhelpful thought, evaluate it, and recreate it into a helpful thought, things are going to change in our level of stress as well as our approach to life. So instead, if I say wearing this mask helps prevent getting and spreading the disease, obviously my new thoughts are, this isn't so bad. It isn't going to go on forever. Probably am helping people, not spreading germs and this type of thing. Kind of like a piglet thought. Piglet always happy and bouncy, and you couldn't get him down. I'm sure all of you have seen the movie Inside Out, or most of you, about Riley, who moves from Minnesota and her ice hockey friends and all of that to San Francisco. And in her head, and in headquarters, she had these five characters that were pretty much in control of her life by getting to the console and manipulating the buttons. I like to think of it as helpful, unhelpful idea. Like we have a good coach in our head who's supportive, teaching us new skills, and we have a bad coach who's yelling at us and putting us down. And so let's practice a couple of things. And again, because of time, I think I'll just walk through them, but I want you to think about them at home before I put some answers up. So here's the situation. You're in the mall. You see your best friend coming the other way, seem to make eye contact, and they turn and walk the other way. What might a bad coach say in that situation? What were the bad thoughts that had come in your mind when your best friend just kind of blew you off, or you thought he or she blew you off? Things like they're mad at me, they don't want to talk to me, there's something wrong with me. And especially you can imagine a situation where if that happened early in the day, you probably spend your whole day trying to figure out what in the heck is wrong with my best friend. Now let's turn it around and think through in your own head a couple of things that a good coach might say. A good coach might say they forgot something and just had to go get it. They didn't see me. They found out they were headed the wrong way in the mall. In other words, how your mind processes that event determines to a great extent what level of stress you will experience as you analyze it and what level of frustration you're going to carry with you through the rest of the day. Let's try one more here. You can read that. Daughter comes home with all A's except for a C in English. A bad coach might say, "Are you just sloughing off in class in English? I suppose you're going to try to tell me the teacher doesn't like you. You've never been good at English and you never will be," that type of thing. Versus a good coach, great work with all the A's. Let's see if we can bring that C up to an A or a B next time. One C and all A's is a great report card. In other words, control how you're processing what's going on in your mind. Now, here's the last one. You're going to need a paper and pencil for this. I guess it's no great revelation that we are social creatures. We like to be around and with other folks, and it's been difficult during this COVID time staying socially connected. Just a quick comment. John McCain, who was the son of Admiral McCain, was then a lieutenant and was shot down over North Vietnam and captured. North Vietnamese tortured those captives horribly. Great physical pain, great physical damage. So when McCain was released, and since his father was so famous, reporters wanted to talk to him, and they asked him, what was your worst torture, expecting some physical description of something? And he said solitary confinement. Being locked up all by myself with no contact with anybody in the outer world was the hardest thing I had to bear, and the closest I came to breaking and doing what the North Vietnamese wanted me to do and say regarding my country and the war. That's where I came the closest. So we're going to do an exercise now. So I'd like to take that clean piece of paper or turn over the one you have and draw something that looks like this. Center circle with some circles, bubbles like balloons coming out from the center. And then you don't need to write down the contact. I'll tell you what I want to do. What I want you to do as we go. First of all, I'd like you to put your name in that center circle. And then in the outer circles, list names of people that you would like to connect with. Ideally, they'd be folks that, because of COVID, you just haven't been able to do it. You haven't been able to contact maybe your grandmother or your relative who's in the nursing home. And you can also put a pet down there if you'd like. But it's a structured process to try to get you to pick somebody in one of those circles, decide who, put their name down in the contract or on a line, decide how you're going to contact them, and then when you're going to do it. And we just have the kids sign it. So that's the way to develop a social map. And again, the exercises are in the back of that SPR manual, which gets us almost to the end. You can do all these on your own. You can go to Google and look at stress management. There's a lot there. I've talked to you about mindfulness. You can look at it as a general term, or you can go to the Davis Mindfulness Center. They have courses for kids, adolescents, and adults, and lots of tools to help you do it. Sometimes, though, it just may be a little tough. You can get a coach, and I talked to you about Utah Strong. That's who we are. You can see the particulars on us. And if you want on that same piece of paper, there's the phone number, 385-386-2289. That'll get you our hotline between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. If you or someone in your family or someone you know needs some extra help. We're going to get through this. I think we're all aware of that. We're certainly going to get through the epidemic. The mental part is probably going to take some work on our part to get through this potential or possibility of a second peak. And with that, I'd like to thank you. I'm showing 1225 or 225, 1425. I'll hang on here if any of you have any questions.
What was that phone number again?
Okay, back it up, I think. It's this here. Let me just put it on this slide. There it is. 385-386-2289. And we're all trained in some element of psychology or social work, or I'm a mental health coach, but whoever gets on the line with you will have skills. Anything else? Okay, well, you've been great. I will cut that out.
Good job. Thank you.
Well, thank you for listening. Hopefully it's something that you can take away with you.